Alrighty, thank you. Well, hello everyone. Like Brooklyn said, my name is Jonathan Strickland. I am the Meriwether County Ag Agent, so I'm just to the west of you all in Pike County. And my role here is, the same as Brooklyn's. I do a lot of the educational programs for Meriwether County, and today I'm glad to be here with you all to share about soil sampling. And like Brooklyn said, it kind of sounds like not a fun thing to listen to or to discuss about, but it is very important at the beginning of each season to start testing your soil and to see where you're starting at and where you want to be. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Brooklyn will be watching the chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. But I will go ahead and share my screen with you all. Hopefully this works. Can everybody see that?
That looks perfect.
Okay, cool. All right, let's see. So the first thing that I wanted to discuss is something that's very important to me because throughout my time in college, taking soil classes and horticulture is my background, which I did forget to mention, but the most important part is to understand the difference between the soil that's out in your yard that the plants are growing in rather than the dirt that's in your house on the ground. So what is soil and why is it not just dirt? This definition that I found is from the Soil Science Society of America. And basically, the soil is the unconsolidated mineral organic matter that's on the surface of the earth. For a short definition, it's where your plants are going to grow. It's where all the nutrients are held for your plants to be successful. So just wanted to throw that in at the very beginning because I think that's a very important place to start. So why, let me move that over here. Why soil tests are helpful. What does a soil test do? What does it tell you? So once you have completed a soil test, you'll see what the results will look like. It basically is going to help you prepare getting ahead on your soil prep. So you're not having to try to change the soil layout in just a month or so, or even a couple weeks before you're planting your things in the spring. So getting ahead, that's why we always say starting now with your soil test. Being able to get those results back is going to allow you to know what nutrients are in your soil, which is going to lead to more blooms and higher yields. And with that, you'll be more successful in the end. So once you get those results back as well, you'll be able to know where your starting point is. Once you have that starting point, you'll be able to know what you need to add to the soil. And we'll talk more about that as well. One of the most underrated reasons of soil tests to me is having your nutrients where you want them and need them to be is actually one of the top reasons or top causes to prevent diseases. So you're preventing those diseases from ever occurring later in the season. So a lot of the nutrients and things that are in the soil help to prevent diseases, and knowing where those nutrient levels are at is going to help you control that later in the season. So a lot of the soil tests that we do here are just going to be a basic soil test, and this is just giving you an idea of what the basic soil test is going to cover. So pH of the soil is going to be, it's going to control the availability of the nutrients, which I believe on my next slide you'll see a lot more of. And then the basic soil results will tell you, how to change the pH. It'll test for the phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, calcium, magnesium, zinc, manganese, and next to all of these, why they're important. Phosphorus is one of the big three that you'll hear a lot about. It helps with the growth and establishment of your plant. The potassium kind of does everything, but it's going to have a lot to do with the water and nutrient movement throughout the plants. One of the other big ones, calcium, cell structure and protection. So one of the big reasons why a lot of plants get diseases is because the calcium is low. So the cells are not as protected from diseases and things like that. So, and then the other three, magnesium is really big on photosynthesis. So if your plants are starting to yellow, that could be why. Zinc is going along with phosphorus growth and development of the plant. Manganese also growth and development of that plant. So why is pH important? So I just mentioned a moment ago, your pH is going to have a lot to do with what nutrients are available to the plant and what levels they are available to the plant in the soil. So the desired range for most of your gardens and flower beds is going to be between 6 and 7. It can go a tad bit lower than that, and a lot above that as well, probably really to 7.5, but 6 to 7 is going to be your sweet mark on where you want your soil pH to be for a majority of your plants. As you can see in the graph that I put here, or the little picture, that 6 to 7 range is going to be where a majority of your nutrients are available at the highest level. With that, that's where your plants are going to be the most successful. Now, one little side note that I will say, a lot of people ask why blueberries and azaleas and things like that like their pH to be a little bit lower. So you might see them wanting to be in like a 5.2 to a 5.8 or something like that. And that's going to be because of the iron in the middle here. Blueberries and a lot of your evergreen shrubs like azaleas and rhododendrons and things like that we have in our area, they're going to need a lot of iron, and that's because they're trying to maintain staying green year round, and iron has a lot to do with photosynthesis and chlorophyll and things like that. So this is just a good layout of showing you where you need your soil pH to be, and we'll show more about the results and how to change that and things like that as we get into the next few slides. So collecting a soil sample is really not very difficult, but it is a little more complex than just, taking some soil from your backyard and sending it off. So I just wanted to go over a few things that you should think about before you even start collecting the sample. So how big of an area are you going to be sampling? Is your flower bed that you're sampling, 100 foot long by 10 foot wide? Well, that's not a huge area. So you might not need to take as many core samples. And I have cores in here a lot, and I thought about it. I didn't ever really defined that. But a core sample to me, this is a soil probe. A core sample is going to be one sample in the soil probe. So if you wondered that, I have that word in here a lot. So I wanted to discuss that. But going back to how large your area is, if your area is a 15-acre hay field, for instance, you might break that down into being a couple different samples with it being such a large area, because you might have, going to the next point, you might have some high spots or some low spots, and those areas are going to be a little bit different than, just representing a whole 15-acre field. So how large your area is very important, and knowing are there any high spots or low spots in that sample area, needing to break that down into more than just one sample. What is already growing in your sample area, or what is going to be growing in your sample area? So going back to my point about flower beds, if you have some evergreen shrubs that are already growing there and you just want to make them more successful, you need to know what they are, so you can let us know when we do the soil sample. We submit that with the sample. What will be growing in their vegetable gardens is a huge thing that people are starting to already prepare for. So vegetable gardens, we have a selection where we can select a full vegetable garden to give you the correct recommendations for what you need to do. But it's also going to tell you how deep to take your core samples. So when you're taking your core samples, and this is mentioned again, how deep you go, whether it be from the base here, just 4 inches up or 10 inches up is going to be dependent on what in that area. So, and then do you have all the tools and supplies already needed? I've already shown you the soil probe. Do you have a bag, a bag to put it in, which I'll show you. There's a picture of this on one of the slides coming up. And then do you have a bucket for your collecting all of the soil together? So just being prepared for what's to come. Do you have all of those things already put together? Going back to the last slide, collecting and how large your area is going to be based on how you collect those samples. So I wanted to throw this in here to show you if these are your flower beds per se, what the best way to collect those samples are before even getting started. So collecting one sample, just say one sample here in the middle of your garden is not going to be representative of the entire area. So making sure you take anywhere from 10 to 15 throughout the entire area is going to give you the best representation of the entire area. Do not take all of your core samples from one area, as you see down here on number C. They took multiple samples, but they did it in one small area, so it's not really giving you the complete coverage of what you're needing. Random spots throughout the entire area, as you can see here, are going to be your best coverage area. Even on this B picture here, even though it says that this is a good way to do it, I would still say take a couple from these corners just to mix it in. So, and then obviously this last one, just walking straight across the field or the flower bed, it's not going to be very good representation. So making sure you get coverage of the entire area is going to give you the best selection points for the entire area. So, all right, so now we're to the point of going out and collecting the samples from your sample area or your garden or whatnot. So a few things to remember before, again, the cores really only need to be anywhere from about 6 inches to 10 inches down. Anything deeper than that is really not going to help anything in most areas here where we're located, or once you get deeper than about 10 inches, it's going to be really the hard clay anyway. So that's going to be a completely different soil setup. You really don't want the soil to be too wet when collecting it. Not only is this going to be messy, but our bags here that we'll be shipping them off in, they're not going to hold up to a lot of moisture. So just being careful when you do that. If it is really wet outside, you can wait a day or two and it'll be a little better. Or once you're done collecting the sample, before you put it into the bag, you can just kind of lay it out on some kind of surface and let it dry a little bit before we put it in the bags. Don't bring an entire 5-gallon bucket full of soil because we don't need that. The little bag here is going to hold about a cup of soil, and of that cup of soil, once it gets to the lab, they're going to test about a spoonful of this. So that's why in these steps I'm about to go over, it's very important, the mixing and the making sure that everything is kind of there representing the entire area. So filling the bucket is very simple. Collect soil from the testing area, add the soil to your bucket or container, making sure that you're mixing it all together, making sure that, all of the 15 spots that you took soil from get kind of mixed in there. So everything is sort of averaged out to being the best representation of the entire area. Once all your cores are in the container, make sure that you give it one last good mix, and that's going to make sure, like I said, the entire 5-gallon bucket is going to go down to this 1 cup, which is going to go down to 1 spoonful. So you really want to make sure it's mixed together well. All right, so you can kind of see a few more things here. Submitting your sample, this is going to be your next step. So once you have all of the soil collected in the bucket, you will bring it to your extension office, or if you pick up the soil bags prior to you collecting the sample and you already have it ready, you are able to bring that directly to the lab, but usually those samples have to come directly through the county because we are going to be able to discuss that with you and whatnot. And plus, we're not really close to Athens. So fill out the information on the back. This is very important because we need to keep track of these samples. We need to keep track of how to get them back to you, and we need to be able to know what to put on your sample, like what's going to be growing there and whatnot. So we need your name, phone number is not super important, but we would like to get in touch with you if there's some sort of issue. Once the lab receives your results, if there's some sort of issue with the sample, they would like to give you a call and talk to you about it. We do need an email with all of our samples because that's where we're going to send the results to you once the results come back. The sample ID is going to be very important, especially if you're bringing in more than one sample to us. The sample ID is really a label for you to know when you get those results back, which bag or which results go with which area. So if you did your flower bed in the front yard, your flower bed in the backyard, and the vegetable garden on the back end of your property or whatnot, each one of those samples needs to be labeled so you know which sample is which. The plant code or the plant ID is very important as well because, again, this is going to allow us and the lab to give you the best recommendations for what you are growing. So I would say of those things, name, email, sample ID, if you're bringing us more than one especially, and the plant code are very important. So when submitting the sample, if you have it in a bucket like this, that's great. If you bring it to us in a plastic bag, that's also great. But we're going to take about a cup of that. We're going to put it in our little bags here, which you can see that I'm holding, and the picture that's also right here on the side. So once we receive the sample, we put that into our system and ship it off to the lab in Athens. Once the soil lab receives your sample, which is very important, once the soil lab receives it, your results will come back to us in 3 to 5 business days. And then we will be in touch with you about emailing those results back. So if you bring us the sample, we enter it into our system and we mail it off to Athens. We're not going to have the results the next day because UPS probably hasn't even picked it up yet or brought it past Atlanta to get to Athens. So it does take usually 7 to 10 days to fully get those results back with shipping and whatnot like that. So, all right. So, once we have shipped the results off to Athens and we get those results back, this is what it's going to look like. So this is a soil sample that I actually did just before the holidays. So this is one that I did for my vegetable garden that I'm preparing for in the spring. So basically what you need to do when you get this is make sure that it's your sample. So make sure it has all of your information correct would be the best thing to do. And then you're going to come down here and you're going to look at all of these bars and numbers that it's giving you from your sample. So speaking from experience, based on when I got this back, I was thinking, wow, I'm pretty well off for the most part. Maybe putting a little bit of potassium out in my garden, things like that. It's all I really have to do. But one of the major things that I noticed was that my pH was actually really high. When we first did this garden about 3 years ago, we put out some lime because we needed it at that point. And this is just showing that from the time that I did the sample last year, I believe this was at about a 6.8, which is about right. So a whole year of that extra year of that lime that's 2 or 3 years old is actually still working in the soil. So my pH is really too high. So I have to go back and kind of fix that. That's going to be one of the main things that you look at. The others are going to be these other bars on this side. Everything else is pretty good on this sample. Your phosphorus is a big thing that you're going to look at. If it's up here and the nutrient's not needed, you really don't have to worry about it. If it's below the bars like this, the potassium, you want to look at adding some of that. Then down here at the bottom, it'll have recommendations for you, and I believe my next slide continues on that. But one thing that you can say is that if you're hovering right around this line of where they're recommending, you don't need to add anything, uh, but you think you might need it later in the year, then just keep that in mind. This is completely your sample, your results, and things like that. So, you might not put any fertilizer out for the first month, but when you're thinking about your plants are starting to use those nutrients as you get farther along into the season, you can probably add some things, in the next couple months. So just keep that in mind. So checking the bars on each one, checking your pH level, and reading the recommendations that are going to come with the analysis, which didn't fit on this slide, so it's on the next. So these are the recommendations that I got with my results, and it's a little blurry, but it's the best I could get. So usually your results are going to tell you if you need lime or not. So like I said, my pH was pretty high, so I don't need any lime added. Again, it'll give you the recommended pH for whatever plant that you chose. So if you were growing blueberries or something like that and your pH was 7.4, then you're going to have major issues with your plants not being healthy and things like that. So you really would want to bring that pH down even farther. But we'll talk about that more. So it'll give you those recommendations here. Broadcasting, it'll give you the correct fertilizers that you want to do. So this tells me a 15-0-15 per 1,000 square foot. But what do those numbers mean? So up here, I gave you just a small little snippet of what they're kind of telling you. So I just use the 10-10-10 fertilizer because that's the one that most people are familiar with. It's just going to be your basic fertilizer that you can use on pretty much anything once it's established, or in a case like this where you're trying to change and add nutrients to your soil. So what do these numbers mean? So the first number here is your N, is your nitrogen. The second number is your phosphorus here. And then this one, the last one, is your potassium. So NPK, 1, 2, 3 here. And if you ever cannot remember how to know what each number is, just remember up is your nitrogen, the down is the second number is phosphorus, and then they're all around is going to be potassium. So for NPK, people will say up, down, all around, and it'll give you just a little bit of idea of what you're trying to do. For vegetable gardens, in particular, just because that's what these results are on, it'll give you recommendations on different crops. It'll tell you what the recommendations up here for, and then it will go down into more of your winter crops. Maybe if you're working on broccoli and cabbage and things like that, you might need to add a little bit more to that. For southern peas, cutting it in half because it really isn't going to need as much. And then you get down into your green crops and things like that that are going to need a lot more of one particular thing, adding it down here. So, and then it'll give you a few more fertilization recommendations down here as well for whatever you have. So when you get the recommendations at the bottom, just read through them, and that's what we're here for. If you need to discuss what you can do if you can't find the fertilizer or something along those lines. There is a fertilizer calculator here attached to your results that you can use for that. But again, it's not an exact science, so just find something as close to what the recommendations are for what you can find. So based on the recommendations, you're going to be doing a lot of fertilizing, and it'll tell you what to add there, how to change your pH, and on some crops and materials, it will tell you how to plant different things along those lines. So I'm going through this way faster than I had anticipated. So if you have any questions, let me know. But one of the other things that I wanted to cover before I am done is what else, the UGA lab can test for. So, you know, everybody thinks of just doing the basic soil tests and things like that, which is, a good option for most of your cases. But if you're doing something that's a little bit more specific and you need to test for something else, you can test for a few of these different things. So, soluble salts, if you're having a problem with too much fertilizer that's built up in your soil, that might be something that you test for. And they'll give you recommendations on how to counterbalance that. Organic matter. So if you have a bed that where you like blueberries or whatnot that need a lot of organic matter because it causes the pH to be a bit lower, you can test for how much of that you have in the soil, nitrates and things like that, kind of, are more along the lines of maybe some hay fields or something like that. Total elemental analysis, 18 elements total in that one. So it's going to go a bit farther than just like the 9 or 10 that are included in your basic analysis that you'll get with your basic test. Carbon and anions are going to be a little bit more in depth and things like that. But this is just giving you an idea of what else you can test for. So, but yeah, like I said, I really went through that much faster than I had anticipated. I asked Brooklyn how long she wanted me to go for, and I told her that I would be able to cover about 45 minutes, and I did it in like 30 minutes. So, if anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to elaborate. If there's anything that I didn't cover, um, you know, please ask. So let's see. There's some questions popping up in the chat here.
And I just wanted to say thank you, Jonathan. No, it was some great information. I know there's a question that came up, so I'm going to let you answer that, but I'm also going to go ahead and throw the poll up so that y'all can answer that if you'd like, or go ahead and minimize it, whichever you'd prefer. And I'll keep the recording going for this question, looks like, Jonathan, because this is a really good one for the group. And then I'll turn the recording off, so you feel free to unmute as you wish.
Yeah, so to answer your question, Rachel, that is a very good question. So, a lot of times your raised beds are going to be filled from the same source. So, like when you're filling your raised beds, you're usually going to do that with the same thing. So, most of them are going to be pretty much the same in relation to what they have in them. I will say that if you're growing different crops in each bed, that can change it a lot. So really, I would say in the first couple years, you might not have to break it up into separate samples. But if you're growing something that is a lot more a heavy feeder, then you might start breaking it up as well. But with them, depending on how large they are and things like that, it would just be on a case by case basis. So, is there anything that you wanted to add to that, Brooklyn?
No, that sounds perfect.
Does anybody else have any questions for us?